Hello, this is candibknittin. I be Candy B, and I be knitting. I hope you be knitting too. This is my YouTube channel, but you can also check me out at Rulude on Instagram. All my links will be in the description box. And today I want to make probably what's going to be the first in a series of videos about a very big, very controversial topic: stash. In particular, I'm going to be talking about yarn stash. How much yarn you got? How much yarn do you need? I'm going to be answering those questions for myself. I'm not here to judge anybody else. But in order to have this conversation, I thought I would start with some definitions. I know a lot of people have baggage around the term stash. I personally don't. I believe it's a decent word when I talk to other knitters, crocheters, crafters, so that we're all on the same page. To me, stash, yarn stash in particular, is the yarn that I have readily available for a project, but it's not currently assigned to a project. And it's really that simple. It's yarn that I could use, but I'm just not currently using. A lot of people are like, well, I more have a collection of yarn. And I'll be honest, I do have some yarn that I have collected. And to me, a collection is more so yarn that is the joy and the use of it came from getting the yarn. And if the world were in tomorrow, if I couldn't knit another thing tomorrow, I would be happy with that yarn just because I got to look at it, just because I got to have it in my person. A big part of that collection is my hand spun yarn. The joy and the utility I got out of that was hand spinning it, and it's a bonus if I get to knit with it. But stash to me is that usable yarn, that yarn that I'm like, I could do something with this. It's in my possession. I'm just not using it right this second. Then people talk about hoards. Not a big fan of that word, not a big fan of that term. I don't really identify with that. I wouldn't call anything I have a hoard. That's for dragons and really bad cable television reality shows. So I thought I would structure this conversation today about the good, the bad, and the ugly of having a yarn stash. And that's kind of how I organize my thoughts. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll start doing a series about the good, the bad, and the ugly of many other things. But today I'm talking specifically just about the yarn, not about the tools, not about how many bags we have, not about how many patterns we have, or how many books I have, but particularly about the yarn. And as far as the good is concerned, I am very pro stash. That's why I don't really like the term hoard, and we could have a whole conversation about, capitalism and having a mindset of not having enough, the economics of it, the gender politics of it. But just from plainly how I feel about having a stash, it makes me feel good, because I come from more of like a visual arts background. At a certain point in my life, I thought I might be a painter or an illustrator. And so to me, yarn is very much a palette. And a big part of my creative process is going and looking at my palette, seeing what colors, what textures I have available to me. And that's what gets my creative juices going. If I'm in a slump and I feel like, I don't really feel like knitting anything, I don't have any good ideas, I just go straight to my yarn, and it kind of tells me what to do and what I want to make from it. And the colors inspire me, the textures inspire me, just how I have things set up in my crafting room. Just being surrounded by something that brings me a lot of joy inspires me. I also find it to be, economical in a lot of ways. It can be. I know a lot of people feel like, if you have a lot of yarn, you spend a lot of money. And yes, you did, but sometimes you go through that trial and error particularly trying to find what I would call like the workhorse yarns, those yarns you go back to repeatedly for certain projects. Like for me, I love a DK weight acrylic, like a mandala or a Lion Brand cupcake yarn for a baby blanket. Boom. A nice 4-weight anti-pilling acrylic, like a Joann's Big Twist for a hat. Boom. And once you find those yarns, and you can find them on sale at certain times, and you stack up on them, like last week I showed you the sock yarns that I like from Lion Brand. I was able to get those 50% off and buy a whole bunch of them. And then when I go to make my socks, maybe I want contrasting toes and cuffs, and I have the same exact yarn, maybe in different colors, and I can mix and match them like that. Or maybe I'm working on a blanket and I'd have just enough yarn left over, but I know, oh wow, I have that other ball of DK weight. I can make a nice I-cord border on this blanket. And so I do find a lot of efficiencies in that way. A lot of times, once your scraps build up, a lot of people are like, I don't know what to do with these scraps. But if you have scraps that are from matching yarns, it's much easier to plan those projects. So I do find a lot of efficiency in that. And then once you know what you like, don't fix it if it ain't broke, And then also, for me, it is good for gift knitting, Sometimes just things pop up. People have babies in the past year. I think maybe 4 babies were born that I know of personally. And as soon as someone said, oh, I'm pregnant, I'm like, oh, I know such and such likes these colors. I know, they're having twins or whatever the case might be. I'm like, I have the yarn already to go, and I know what yarns I like to make things for babies. I recently found out that I could make a baby cardigan out of 1 ball of worsted weight yarn. I'm like, oh wow, I have 4-ply worsted weight acrylic yarn, and I can be using those for baby sweaters when those come up. Or in the past year, I've pretty much knit all of my in-laws' hats, and I just went to my yarn stash, saw what colors, what textures were there, and it was almost like seeing the person sitting there right in front of me. I was like, oh man, my sister-in-law, she reminds me of this bright pink color. Or my brother-in-law, he loves the cowboys. I have this blue and silver type yarn. And I just find it to be pretty efficient as far as like shopping goes, shopping for people, gifting for people. You see a yarn you like, like, oh, I can make something for someone down the line. That being said, I do have a little project I want to show you. This is a hat for my daughter's school teacher, because I just was in my yarn room, and sometimes I'll go and like just grab a bunch of skeins and just cake up yarn and just see, is this something I want to work with? And I have this yarn. It's from Little Fox Yarn, which is a local to me yarn dyer. And it's worsted weight yarn, which is my favorite yarn to make hats out of. And I have this kind of bluish teal color. And this color, it's actually called Fried Pumpkin, and it's this orangish red color. And I saw them, and one of my daughter's teacher's favorite colors is orange, and my daughter's school colors are actually blue and orange. And I was like, oh, that would make a neat hat, and I'm doing what's called the ombre hat. So this is barely just the start of this hat. Just a simple ribbing I started on, and eventually when I get into the body of the hat, I'm going to start using the orange color, and it's called the Ombré hat. It's a free pattern. I'll put it in the description below, but it's going to kind of fade from the blue into the orange, and it'll be a nice 2-color hat. I see the teachers all the time helping out with the car riders, the car line, so in the wintertime she'll have something warm to put on. It'll be in school colors. And I just saw it and thought of her, and I just saw it in my yarn room and thought of her. And so I'm really looking forward to making that for her. And I think I might have, because it usually takes me 1 skein to make 1 hat, And I have 2 skeins here that I'm fading, and so I think I might have a little left over to make hand warmers for her, which might be nice, especially, yeah, like I said, helping out with the cars in the evening, going to sports games in the evening. I think she'll like that. So that's the good of having a yarn stash. Let's get into some of the bad. There's something called sunk cost fallacy. If you took economics in school, it's all about the idea that once you've paid for something, that money's gone. It's not coming back. Once that time is spent, that time is gone. It's not coming back. But a lot of times people will hold on to things, and this is kind of getting a little psychological. People will hold on to things beyond their useful life because they spent that money. But holding on to that thing isn't going to get your money back, And so you have this yarn, you bought it, it felt good in the moment, you thought you might use it, you thought you might like it, and for whatever reason you're not using it. But I can't get rid of it. I paid so much money for it. I can't get rid of it. It was a gift, and I feel bad because this person went and bought me yarn. I can't get rid of it. At the time I had the best of intentions. I really was gonna make this sweater, but I don't really want that sweater anymore. Or I bought this yarn because I thought these colors were gonna work, and now that I'm looking at it, I don't like these colors anymore. And so that is something I definitely struggle with, especially when you don't have a lot of money and you're spending money on things, and you're spending money just for fun. For me, knitting is for fun. I don't need to knit to have clothes to wear. In fact, it's a very inefficient way to have clothes is to knit them. And so I'm already spending money on a luxury item, and then to not use it feels even worse. But there's no use in making yourself feel any worse, sitting there looking at this thing. So I definitely have those moments. I had Karen Simply Soft is a great example of that. I started knitting, and people would say, "Oh, acrylic yarn is so rough. Acrylic yarn is so rough. You should use Karen Simply Soft. It's like the tops as far as acrylic yarn goes." And I went to the store, and here in America, there is I don't know what region of America I live in Virginia, and we have this store called Ollie's, and I don't know what other states have this store, but it's a discount store. They have like overstock type things that they sell for deep, deep discounts. And they had Karen Simply Soft, and I must have bought nearly every ball of Karen Simply Soft they had. And it was like 99 cents a ball. And I'm just like, this is going to be great. And I started knitting with it. And as I'm describing this yarn to you, I can hear how this yarn squeaked against my needles and the texture of it. And I don't like it. And it's an incredibly popular yarn from a very popular company. And I personally do not care for it. And I was like, well, I went out to the store, I bought it, I spent this money. It could be a blanket for someone. I don't have to, and I don't like the texture of it either. So even if I made something out of it, despite how much I hate knitting with it, I wouldn't want to keep the thing because it has this very just squeaky texture. And finally, I just donated it. I bagged it up, and that's what I do with a lot of yarns. I go through my yarn stash and I pick things up, and maybe things that I'm not as excited about anymore, because as much as I've spent money on yarn, I've had people give me yarn, I've had people give me needles, I've had people be very generous to me in all aspects of my life. So I'm just like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna pay it forward, because a lot of people love Karen Simply Soft and will be happy to have this. So go for it. Another thing that, kind of goes along with that is this peer pressure sometimes I feel. Especially, I learned to knit from YouTube, and I turn on these knitting videos or crochet videos, and everyone knows what I'm about to say. You turn on the YouTuber, and they have this massive wall of yarn behind them. And it's like color coded and rainbow, and you can kind of recognize certain cakes, and you're like, oh, I know that latte cake they got. And sometimes, I fall victim to the peer pressure, and I'm just like, well, I should have a lot of yarn too. If I'm going to be taken seriously as a knitter, if I want to do this, I should do that. And I know I'm a grown person, and I should have my own thoughts, but when you see 100 knitters online and they all have the same wall and they all have a lot, sometimes you want a lot too. And as much as I have my certain stash of things that I like, sometimes like, oh, well, I should have a few more pretty skeins of this, hand-dyed yarn. And so I've definitely done a lot of work of talking to myself and telling myself, like, what do you want? What is enough for you? And it can go the opposite way. Sometimes you watch someone and they're like, I don't have a stash at all. And I've completely stashed down and I am 100% efficient in all things. And you're like, well, I have a lot of yarn still. Maybe I have too much yarn. It's like, well, how much yarn do you have, and is it bringing you joy? It's all about balance, especially when it comes to retail therapy, because I love to shop. I really do enjoy shopping, and you have to be like, okay, how much do I enjoy shopping, and then how much do I enjoy storing things and organizing things and having things? And I always have to strike that balance. When new things come in, sometimes you got to donate things or give them away to people or do some stash busting projects. And that's fine too, but you just got to know when is enough, And as much as I love having that artist palette, sometimes it can feel a little boxed in, a little hemmed up, because a new pattern will come out and it's just like, oh, this new pattern came out. Do I want to go and buy new yarn for it? Maybe I can use the yarn that's in stash. And instead of going and maybe knitting the things that would excite me, I'm like, oh God, I got to knit with the stuff that I got. So let me go find something that maybe I'm not so excited about just so I use the yarn. And then, like for instance, Stephen West MCAL is coming up, and it's like, oh, it's a gradient. I don't have any gradient yarn. Do I go out and buy 4 more skeins of yarn? I should use the old yarn, It can feel kind of overwhelming. And then just the idea that, there's going to be new yarns that come out. And Tony Lipsy's yarn came out this week, and you better believe I was online yesterday, September the 1st, purchasing my balls of yarn. And the funny thing is, I bought the exact amount that I need for the exact project that I want to make, which is very much growth on my part as a knitter, because when I first started knitting, I just was buying stuff and I didn't know what a sweater quantity was, or, what colors I liked, or what fabrics went well together. And so I just have random stuff that I bought when I first started knitting. But now that I've made a certain amount of things, I know I have a decent idea of what it takes to make something. So I bought yarn because I have known since I started knitting that I want to make a blanket for my bed. And so I just bought the yarn that I would need to make a blanket. I didn't go too wackadoo. I was thinking I would buy a ball of every color, but I was like, no, let me just buy the colors that excite me and buy it in a quantity that I need. And it reminded me, and I feel bad because I don't remember the person, but I was watching this YouTube video and the person was talking about stash. And they were saying how a big problem with their stash is when they go to use things, they tend to use the newer things. They rarely reach back to things that are a few years old. And I'm finding that with myself, because now that I'm 2 years into knitting, I know what I like, I know what I don't like. And so when I buy new things, it's much more in tune with the person I am now. And so I find myself, this yarn that I'm getting from Tony's line, Happy Place yarn, as soon as I get here, I'm going to start knitting that blanket. And so that's less stuff that I'm going to be knitting from stash. So it's telling me that a lot of the older stuff can probably go because I'm not looking at it. Which brings me to the ugly, which, trigger warning, we're going to talk about death. Something that makes me really anxious is a term called sable. S-A-B-L-E, sable. Stash acquired beyond life expectancy. The idea that you can have so much yarn that you won't be able to get to it, And I hate to be macabre, but it's something, like very real. Like, oh, I might not, and it's not even like I might die tomorrow. I might sprain my wrist. I might start to hate knitting. I don't know. Anything can happen tomorrow. And how much yarn do I really want to deal with in the event something happens? And so that being said, how much yarn do I have? Depending on how you count, we can talk individual balls, we can talk 50-gram amounts, we can talk 100-gram amounts. I have about 125 to 150 balls of yarn in my current possession that I have no plans for. Is that a lot? It's probably too much for me personally. There's something to be said about having more than 100 anythings, and 100, I guess, just from being a small child, just sounds like a big number. So in my imagination, I'd like to have less than 100 balls of yarn, but the issue isn't so much the amount. There's the amount of yarn you have, there's the space you have in your house. Do I want to dedicate a certain amount of space in my house? I have the space, but I don't have the functional layout I'm looking for yet. I don't really have my ideal crafting situation. So I have yarn in shelves, I have yarns in buckets. And if I had 150 balls of yarn actually organized the way I want them, I might feel a little bit different. But right now I'm just like, I wish this all kind of fit in the space I have now. The other thing is, we go back to Sable. I have kind of tracked over the past year and a half how much yarn I use. And last year I used about 60 balls of yarn. And this year I'm on track to do just about the same. And so that means right now I have, 2.5, almost 3 years worth of yarn. Do I want to be using this same exact yarn 2 years from now? Is the person that I was 3 years ago when I started knitting and bought a bunch of this yarn, am I that same person now? And am I going to be that person 2 years from now? Probably not. So I do have some paring down to do. I do have some thoughtful curation to do. And also, I have only so many friends that are going to have so many babies and have, everyone I know only has one head. We're getting into the territory where, people are going to start avoiding me if I bring them a knitted hat every single time I see them. So some things for me to think about. I'm not too pressed about doing any kind of bans or any kind of, great stash down, yarn diet. If I don't like the word hoard, I really don't like the word diet. I'm going to continue to buy yarn when I want to buy yarn, if I can afford yarn. And I think a lot of it will take care of itself. I'll continue to donate when I can. I'll continue to give gifts when I can. And eventually the proportion of what I have to what I need will change, Like I said last week, I'm really into knitting socks. So I'm going to have more of those basic sock yarns, and I'm going to have less. Today I pulled out a ball of DK merino bamboo yarn that is single plied together. Don't know what I'm going to use that for. Probably won't buy that type of yarn again. I'll, have a certain proportion that is the DK weight acrylics for when someone does have a baby, a certain proportion. Probably my proportion of worsted weight's going to come down a lot now that I've knitted a lot of hats. And so I'll just wait and see, and maybe a year from now I'll make another video and let y'all know how that went for me. I will show you, since we're talking about the ugly, I will show you some missteps I may have made as a beginner knitter in the stash department, and what I'm doing to fix that. I do always try to keep something on the needles that is focused on bringing stash down, even if it's not something that excites me. But let me show you this guy here. So this is an idea I got from Gary at Urban Yarns. This is just one long I-cord. And an I-cord is literally, it's knitting in the round in the smallest circumference possible. It's 3 stitches just slipped and knit around and around, so it creates this rope. And this is six strands of this crochet thread I bought. Got it from the thrift store. It's the Shipjes Catatonia, I want to say. And I got it in all these different colors. I was taken in just because it was a really good price, but I'm not going to sit around and make a bunch of crochet thread doilies. I can't even crochet. So what Gary from Urban Yarns does, he takes a bunch of fingering weight yarns, holds them together, then makes an I-cord out of them. And what that does, it takes it from, maybe you're holding 6 of these fingering weights together and getting maybe a worsted or an Aran, and it takes it to like a super bulky. And I'm really into making baskets. I've made my whole family laundry baskets, and this is kind of meta, and my husband's sitting right here watching me film this. I know he's going to roll his eyes, but it can be a basket to put more yarn in after I finish making this long cord. Also, my kids kind of love how rainbowy this is, so they might, take the basket and put their, little toys in it and stuff. But, I'm trying. And that'll be 6, skeins gone when I'm done with that. Then I have the stereotypical beginner knitter story. Went to Joann's with my 4-year-old daughter when I was, just starting out knitting. And I really can't even blame her for this purchase, but she's definitely my little accomplice. Went to Joann's, bought a bunch of stuff. I do like Joann's Big Twist. I think they have the best anti-pilling 4-weight value acrylic yarn. But tell me why I bought this. This is, now it's a pillow, but before it was a ball of BERNAT Velvet Baby. And it's, I don't even think the camera's going to show it super duper well because it's very fuzzy. But it was one ball. It was on clearance. And it was velvet yarn, and I was just like, oh, I've seen people, crochet bees out of this, and so maybe I can, crochet some amigurumi thing out of it. I was gonna crochet a bee amigurumi bin. So I've had that literally since like the first weekend I learned to knit. I went to Joann's and I bought that, and I've just been staring at this giant ball of velvet yarn. So I was just like, I'm gonna use this. One of the things I really love to do when I'm looking for patterns, Yarnspirations has just a massive free pattern library on their website, and that's BERNAT yarn, which is made by Yarnspirations. So I just went to the Yarnspirations website, clicked on free patterns, and looked up baby velvet yarn, and there was a pattern for a baby pillow, and like the pillow had like bunny ears on it, and I was like, oh, I don't need bunny ears, I just need a pillow for my couch, because that was also part of my knitting. I was like, oh, I'm gonna make pillows for my couch, and I don't like thick blanket yarn. And so I found this thing, and I did something different because the original pattern, I'm just gonna hold this, the original pattern is knitted in 3 pieces. So you have the whole front panel, and then you turn it around, and you have this top lip and the bottom lip. And they knit all of these separate, and then they sewed them together. And all I did was I cast on, I think it was like 53 stitches, 54 stitches, the same amount as the pattern, but I knit it all in one piece. And then when I got to the side, I just folded over and I picked up stitches on the side. So it was, seamless, no sewing at the end. And then I did the ribbing on both sides. And I did a little, I don't know if I can show this, but I did an edge of pearl stitches just so it would give the fold of the pillow and give it some more structure. Haven't blocked it yet, haven't woven in my ends. I just wanted to show it on the pillow so you can tell that it's a pillow. And so those are the kind of things I'm working on to get rid of some of the stash, get rid of some of the stuff, because I know that there's going to be other yarns and other things to knit, especially when my Happy Place yarn gets here. And so, like I said, this is going to be probably the first of many talks about yarn stash, because like I said, I didn't get into, economic status, gender politics, all of that kind of stuff. Also didn't get into all the patterns I have and the patterns you want to knit. But same principles apply. You know, you want to have things you can go back to and reference time and time again, but you also want to leave space for the new, shiny, exciting things that complement the person you're growing into. So I'm going to leave it there for tonight. I hope you do all the YouTube things. You like, you subscribe, you comment, you share with a friend. If you're going to comment below, let me know, are you pro-stash, anti-stash? Do you have a lot of project bags, a lot of notions and needles? What's your go-to kind of stash busting type projects? Let us know. Like I said, you can follow me at Rulude on Instagram and see all of these projects and more as they come to fruition. You can also buy me a cup of coffee on Ko-Fi. Until the next time, I'll see you around. I hope you be knitting.